evening and welcome to our very first business this evening is a public hearing meeting. I would like to Mrs. Luton know that the board is all board members in attendance with the exception of Jill Patterson. The purpose of our public hearing, this portion of the meeting, is we would like to invite the public to address the board on the 2016-2017 proposal of opening school on a date, more than 10 days prior to the first Monday in September, as provided in section 171-031-3 RSMO. So at this time, do we have anyone in the public that would like to address the board on the 2016-17 proposal of opening school on a date more than 10 days prior to the first Monday in September? Okay, hearing none, this time I would like a motion to adjourn this public hearing.
So moved.
Thank you. Andy Bush, motion. A second?
Second.
Second, Jean Twitty. And we do need to vote at this time. Mrs. Luton, will our votes come up electronic? Okay. Okay, we will now adjourn from the public hearing meeting. And moving right on into our combined study session regular December 8th meeting.
Call Teresa up to start the pledge.
Okay. While Mrs. Luton is switching off from meetings here, we're going to, again, our roll call stands. All board members in attendance with the exception of Jill Patterson. At this time, the next order of business after our roll call is our Pledge of Allegiance. And Teresa Bledsoe, will you please come forward and introduce our pledge?
Thank you, Dr.
Person.
This evening it's my honor to introduce Orion Cannon, who is a senior at Studi Alternative High School. And he's very excited that he's going to be graduating in 8 days.
Awesome.
So he is worked hard. He's worked very hard to earn a diploma, so I think he and his family are going to be celebrating that. He's accompanied tonight by his mother, Heather, and his principal, Josh Dickinson, and his teacher, Justin Dickinson, and his teacher, Josh Douglas. And according to Mr. Douglas, Orion has had excellent attendance and makes outstanding grades, all A's except for 1B currently, I think. And he's participated in service learning while he's attended at Studi, and he began attending at Studi in January. He was voted president for the Jobs for America's graduate program at Studi and just returned from the JAG National Student Leadership Academy in Washington, D.C., where he had participated in the employability skills competition. So Orion plans to become a law enforcement officer. He's currently thinking about attending OTC to get his general ed requirements and then moving on to possibly MSU to become a narcotics detective, I think. So we bring Orion forward today as an example of the dedicated students who attend Studi and the great things that they can accomplish through that program. So we ask that you stand while Orion leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Orion, we'd like to present you with this.
Comments? Anyone on the board? Anything to say? Thank you very much for taking your time and coming to do this for us this evening. We certainly hope that we hear more about your progress in the future after graduation and your plans forward. So thank you very much for being here.
We had scheduled to recognize under Honoring Excellence another student, Zach Moore, but I don't think he is here. They're on their way, so I don't know if you want to wait.
We'll break whenever that happens.
Okay.
And we'll come back.
All right, so we'll wait until then. Thank you. Zach is a senior at Glendale High School, and he's achieved 2 distinct honors. In November, it was announced that he had been selected for the 2016 U.S. Army All-American Marching Band, and on January 9th, he will perform in Texas with the band during halftime at the U.S. Army All-American Bowl. He's among only a few musicians in Missouri over the past 5 years who have been selected for this honor, so it's a very rare honor to be chosen, especially among trombones. How many trombones are there in the band that were selected this year?
In the U.S. Army All-American Marching Band, I believe there were 8.
8. So from across the nation, he was selected as one to fill one of 8 positions. For his second accomplishment, Zach will perform at Carnegie Hall in February with the High School Honors Performance Series, which showcases some of the most talented student performers in high school today. He's supported here tonight by his mother, Angela, I think, and his band director, Troy Cronkite. And in addition to some of these national honors, Mr. Cronkite has said that Zach, was it just this week, was named to the All-State Orchestra. And he already this year has also earned first chair trombone in both the All-District Honor Band and the District 9 Jazz Band. He's also principal trombone in the Springfield Youth Symphony. And all of these honors he achieved in his junior year as well. So he's a very accomplished musician and very dedicated to his art. So we'd like to recognize him for his accomplishments.
Let's see if we have any questions. Anyone have a question? We're extremely impressed. I don't know about the rest of you. I'm not musically gifted, but I very much respect and admire students are, and we know you've put a lot of work over the years into that. So what is your, I mean, the list just goes on and on and on of your accomplishments. What is your highlight?
Definitely performing at Carnegie Hall. When I learned that I was gonna do that, I could not believe it. Like it's honestly like every musician's dream to perform there, and that's just I'm gonna walk in there and probably get into tears. It's gonna be awesome.
And when will you be there? In February?
Yes, February.
Well, we'll be thinking about you. We want to report back.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. And thanks to Mom. Thanks to teachers. Okay, we'll move on to approval of our agenda. So at this time, do I have a motion to approve the Tuesday, December 8th Board of Education Combined Study Regular Session Agenda?
So move.
Thank you. Tim Rosenberry, a second.
So moved.
Jerry
Second,
Lee?
whatever.
Yeah, that's fine. And at this time, we do need to vote. I think it's up on our computers. Excellent. Thank you for voting. Motion passed. This time, of our board meeting, we allow comments. We welcome comments from the audience about issues that are being discussed tonight. In other words, those items that are listed on our agenda. We ask those individuals to fill out a form that lets us know what agenda item they would like to speak to. And at this time, Mrs. Luton, I think we do not have agenda item comments. Okay, thank you. Move on to approval of minutes. We do take one collective vote on our consent agenda items 3, 4, and 5. Please keep in mind, this evening may be the first review of some of the items. However, we have had an opportunity to ask questions because we were doing a combined study and regular session this evening. So at this time, do I have a motion to approve consent agenda items 3, 4, and 5.
So move.
Thank you. I have a motion by Amy Bush, a second by Bruce Renner. So we do need to vote on our consent agenda items at this time. Thank you. Moving on to, vote is complete, to our treasurer's report. One of our most exciting and favorite times of the evening to hear about our money.
So excited that you're excited. Okay.
Ms. Embry.
Thank you very much. I did pull together just a few slides for your viewing pleasure this evening. As is our usual process, we have provided you the regular information for consideration, including the approval of checks and other items in lieu of checks. We also have provided our typical information that we post in the form of the reports, the various reports that we started in October, I believe. In addition to that, though, this evening we have a special report, and that is called the ASBR. So this information will help us journey through that. So a few highlights from our regular treasurer's report information. We have the operating fund revenue. Again, no significant changes this month. Another item that's posted for you includes the budget amendment, and these numbers are representative of through the November 30 date. Our total operating budget at this time is just over $250 million, $250,019,514. That's for revenue. And again, we see that local revenue comes in at just over 61%, the greatest source of our funds for operations. The expenditure budget is slightly under the revenue projection for operating funds. Total of $247,752,207. Excuse me. Thank you. Again, it's very normal that we cruise close to that 80% mark with regard to salary and benefit costs in our operating budget. Excuse me. The budget amendment I referenced as being posted is very slight this month. We are showing an expenditure increase of $47,849, and that's due to an increase in donations. We didn't get the revenue increase included in the budget yet, and that will come forward next month, and it will be at that 50,000 threshold. So some additional funds from reported to us from our foundation folks from Schneider. This leaves us then with an estimated operating fund balance percentage at this time of 16.9%. We ended last year at 16.96%, and so we continue to maintain that flat operating fund balance percentage. And according to our board policy DIAA, the board strives to reach the 15% or greater threshold, and so we are within that board policy. This shows you a snapshot of all governmental funds. So if we factor in beyond operating, which pays for supplies and people, we are including our debt service obligation as well as capital projects from regular sources and those bond funds. We have also noted on here that the GoCaps and the Health Benefit Trust Fund are separate funds, and that was part of our explanation at the June 30 meeting. Our grand total budget, governmental funds and those other funds, exceeds $426 million. So this leads us now to the ASBR. Now, the ASBR actually stands for Annual Secretary of the Board Report. Ms. Luton, did you engage in activity for this? You did not. It's called that because in most school districts that are very small, the Secretary of the Board likely also generates accounts payable checks and payroll checks and works with the auditor and produces the Annual Secretary of the Board Report to the state of Missouri. It's an annual report. It's due August 15th of each year. and we are empowered to update it as often as we need to, as we get corrections entered and closing out a prior year. But then we absolutely ensure that we are in sync with our auditor once the financial audit is concluded. And that's why this is being brought to you, this particular board meeting, in conjunction with the annual audit. So the ASBR is comprised of the categories I've indicated here. Part 1 includes a summary of funds, the restricted fund balance, and also transfers. Part 2 includes revenue. Part 3 is expenditures. Part 4 is long-term and short-term debt and transportation. And then there are some other reports that are provided through this calculation process. Now, I was sharing with someone that back in the day, my very first ASBR report, I did it with a pencil, an eraser, a bunch of fields and papers with fields on them, and a calculator. And we've come a long way. We also used to submit it through a diskette that we mailed back and forth to the state. I'm happy to tell you that it's a web report now that we can interact with and do uploads from our financial system. So don't be frightened by this. I wanted to take you through the journey of each of the documents, talk a little bit about them, but know that that document is posted for your viewing pleasure, as I'm sure you took in it all in preparation for this meeting. So part 1 shows you the primary funds, and we've talked about this in previous sessions, and especially when we talked about the budget back in June. But when you look at the ASBR report, it collapses together the capital projects fund with the bond fund, and that's a primary item to note. We also do not report those, the fiscal agent for GoCaps or the health benefit trust fund. Those are not considered governmental funds and not included on the ASBR. You'll see there that 16.96% fund balance that I referenced. And I think one difference between this report and perhaps audit information, we consider debt service fund to be all restricted, but the requirement of DESI when we report the restricted fund balance is that it's limited to those funds that are held in an escrow account ready to make a special payment to retired debt. And when you do a refinancing, that occurs frequently. So this shows you the summary of beginning balances that would have rolled from the June 30 prior to July 1 of 2014. Also in the upper left-hand corner, you'll note that the assessed valuation for December 31 is indicated. And we did change to a cash basis of accounting, and that is noted as well in that upper left-hand corner. This shows you the detail behind that restricted fund balance information that populates on the front page. And this shows transfer information, and there are a number of transfers by which the school districts in Missouri may move money from fund to fund, but they're very controlled, and this explains better for you what that can be. Most districts don't have a levy in their teacher fund at all, so they're driving very little revenue into the teacher fund. And even those districts that do have a levy, oftentimes we find that we need to still transfer money into the teacher fund. And because those two funds, the operating or the general and the teacher fund, are looked at together for operating funds, it really doesn't matter. It's just a way of ensuring that you understand the logic behind why a transfer occurs. So we are highlighting that we provided a transfer of $3,285,141.22 into the teachers fund from the general fund. We also had a slight transfer for food services of $492.42, and that's because the food service account basically runs out of the operating area, or Fund 50 for us. That's a sub-fund of Fund 10, and we are then allowed to transfer over anything that was required to be coded to the capital projects fund. The largest, or the next large transfer noted, and the final one, is it's a general transfer that is allowed for school districts, and it's calculated based on this formula that you see to the left. It considers 7% of the state adequacy target times the weighted average daily attendance. In our system, that number right there could be as high as nearly $10.5 million based on our data, our calculation. We can transfer anywhere up to that threshold. We did not transfer $10.5 million. We transferred $2 million this past year. And that's basically to provide the source, the revenue source for capital expenditures. So when you are required to code something to Fund 40, because it's considered capital in nature, you need to have revenue for that. And in most systems, there are no levies in the capital projects fund to drive revenue there. That's the mechanism to do it. This shows you a revenue summary. This is part 2, and I just took the first section and then the very last section to give you an idea of how they're structured. It's basically based on the general ledger accounting code structure that's provided by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and all school districts are required to follow that structure. And all of the data that occurs from July 1 through June 30 of each fiscal year then funnels into each of these accounts. The revenue report is displayed by object and by fund. And then when we move to the expenditure section, there are actually 3 different reports. 3A is program by fund, but we call it function. That's actually function code. As you can see, even DESE calls it a function code, so I'm not quite sure why they call it program there. I'd call that function by fund. Then there's also a, I don't know that I have that in here. No, I did not include it. But there's also an object by fund and a function by object, I believe. So there are 3 different sets, so 3A, 3B, and 3C. You can slice it and dice it any way you like to see how the expenditures played out for the entire fiscal year. This is the application for state transportation aid. Many years ago, this was a separate application that was provided, and then the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education determined why not combine it with the ASBR report so that the data could then there could be some checks and balances in terms of some of the information provided. So this is where we provide our ridership lists and also those eligible route miles and also ineligible route miles. I'll go back off to the right. I had a section over here. There's depreciation information included as well. And behind this page, within the report that's posted, are page listings of all of our buses. That's what that is, yes. So if we retire any buses, then that would be noted as well. And all of the data then ties out to the financial information provided on the ASBR. This page is quite handy for reference, and it includes long and short-term debt. This is part of Section 4 of the ASBR, and it includes not only our general obligation bonds, which are all listed here on the lower section by year, but it also includes other types of loans that we may have encountered during the year. You'll note that we did not end up doing a tax anticipation note last year because our fund balances were able to carry us and meet our payroll and other obligations through December 31. That was a great thing. And then we received that January tax information or tax payment to us to take care of our fund balance. The next page gets into some of the detail behind some of those other types of loans. So again, if you had school bus leases or energy loans, those would be included here. Shows you the principal and interest retirement each year. This is one of the other reports included in this document, and I would like to highlight that this is preliminary information because sometimes the data from core data for attendance is not always just in time for the ASBR report that's generated, but it's the best information that we have. And so if we're talking about charging local effort or paying local effort to other districts because of a transfer of students, this would be the tool that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education uses for that. This report is a current expenditure calculation report, and again, if you'll note down at the bottom, if we talk about our current expenditure per ADA or average daily attendance, there's also a current expenditure per weighted average daily attendance, and you'll note that those two numbers are very close. Our current expenditure per weighted average daily attendee last year is preliminarily set at $8,793.24. The reason that there's a calculation process to get at this, you can't simply take your total costs and divide it by the number of students, because we also have revenue that comes in to offset certain costs, such as you see that nutrition services is listed there, or student activity costs would also be a revenue deduct, and that's what's listed on the first section. This final report here is a certificated salary report, and it's very tiny print, but in the lower right-hand section it says we are in compliance. And this is a calculation, again, that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has in place to ensure that the compensation level remains at an adequate level. And this report is the indirect cost calculation. We are provided a non-restricted rate and a restricted rate, and you can see that those are listed in this area. 15.58% is the preliminary number, 3.5% for the restricted rate. These rates would be used for certain grants or contracts for which the district might apply, and we are enabled to include this rate for additional costs to cover administrative costs when applying for a grant. And oftentimes that can, depending on the size of the grant, obviously that can generate additional revenue to offset costs incurred for managing the grant. So that includes your overview of the ASBR report, and I would entertain any questions you might have for me. Yes. Ready for the test?
No, I thought we were.
Oh, you were going to be. No, I would not do that to you.
Can I, just a general question?
Sure.
About the budget. It looks like the money's coming in as expected. There are no surprises.
There are no surprises.
Time and
Right. I will tell you that the staff in the finance department provided me with an assessment by fund of how we're tracking this year relative to how we tracked last year. And we see no anomalies. We feel very comfortable with the budget that we've provided you at this time. We will continue to do an analysis of salary and benefits for ensuring that we have the appropriate level budgeted there. With that being close to 80% of our budget, that's important to really keep that on our focus. But otherwise, we expect no surprises.
the big one comes in December when you get
Yes.
tax
yes.
money, so that will
Right.
be interesting to see.
Denise, I take some of the blame for
Good.
Carol going through all this. I was asking her the other day on the telephone, I said, why are we, this is all new stuff or unusual stuff, this ASBR stuff. First of all, what does ASBR stand for, and what is it telling us? And why are we looking at it? And she said, well, one of the reasons is because the state requires that the board look at this. And so I said, well, you know, it probably would be helpful, at least for me, for there to be at least a brief overview on how to use that report. And I want to thank you for doing that.
Sure.
It's a lot of, you know, that's one of the key components of, or key responsibilities of the board is financial oversight. And I realize that this is a lot of big numbers in broad categories, but Annie asks those great questions that kind of get right to the issue. And so thank you for doing this, and thank
My
you to everyone
pleasure.
else for indulging me.
I'd just like to say that this work could not be done without Kim Mulvaney, our Director of Finance. She does phenomenal work and is leading that team, and they are all working hard to make a number of changes for improvement of efficiencies, and not only the work just to prepare our documents each month, but the audit as well. So I'd like to say that.
Any other questions or comments? A lot of work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so at this time, do I hear a motion that the board approves the treasurer's report as presented?
So moved.
Second.
By Tim Rosenberry, and a second by Annie Bush. This time we need to vote to approve the treasurer's report.
It was all eyes. You want to see it?
No, we'll trust you. All ayes. Okay, well, moving on to our information report 7.01. There are no information item reports at this time. Moving on to board policy, adoption revisions. Thank you, Mr. McKenna.
All right. Good evening. We're going to walk through a quick conversation tonight. Well, I don't know how quick it will be. I suppose that's up to you, isn't it? A brief presentation about Board of Education Policy, JECA. This is our student admissions policy, and this is a continuation of a discussion that initially began in our collective bargaining process with our teachers' collective bargaining unit regarding the transfer of employees' children into the system regardless of where they live. Even if students of those employees lived outside the system, the potential for allowing them to transfer into the system. So my goal with this presentation is to walk you through a little bit of information that we've worked to gather from throughout the state, talk with you a little bit about, give you some data about the potential impact of this type of change, the potential benefits, and as well as some concerns. Ask you to have a discussion and provide us some direction about which direction you'd like us to move. So beginning with the issue, this is just a recap of the issue, and that is simply, should Springfield schools allow employees, children, serving in certificated positions, employees who are serving in certificated positions, to transfer into the district regardless of where they live, even if they live outside the system? We asked our teachers what they thought about this potential policy. They would be primarily affected by this, and we provided an opportunity for all teachers to respond to the survey, and we received 1,024 responses. Of those, 95.79% of respondents indicated that they would perceive this change to be a benefit to working in Springfield schools. 81.93% of them indicated that it would positively affect their decision to accept employment in Springfield, and it would positively affect their decision to stay in Springfield or be retained by Springfield as an employee. About 64.5% or 64.8% of respondents indicated that they personally would take advantage of this type of policy change. And we went on to ask them how many employees or how many children they had that they would consider transferring into the system. That number, when we totaled it up, came to 634. And yes, ma'am.
Finish your thought, then I'll ask.
Okay. So 634. That's the first time that number will appear of a few times in this presentation. And we did not ask the age of the student. We didn't ask when they would be transferring them in. So really that 634 number represents a eventuality that will really never happen. It's the largest number that could ever transfer into the system with the population that we surveyed. So for example, the person responding to the survey may have a 1-year-old that wouldn't be eligible to come into the system for another 4 years. They may have a student in high school. So we know we won't receive that many transfers, but when we start talking about the implications from a cost perspective and those kinds of questions, we want to think about the maximum potential cost, and this is the number that we're going to use to estimate that.
So, but this is a survey of all teachers, not just teachers that live outside the district.
The survey of all teachers.
So some of that 64.8% don't live outside the district, but they are saying if they did, they would want to take advantage of it.
Yeah, the question was actually phrased, if this policy change were implemented, would you benefit from that? And if so, would you transfer students in?
Benefit from it.
Yeah, and would you transfer students in?
So that does mean it's just those that.
Yes, and then we asked them how many students they would be transferring in. Okay, so we wanted to know what our benchmark districts are doing with regard to this type of policy, and we looked at benchmarks in 2 ways. The first are regional benchmarks. These are the districts that border us geographically. And secondly, we looked at statewide benchmarks. These districts are a mix of districts of similar size, also districts of interest that we just like to keep an eye on and know and understand what their policies are and how they run their systems. So you can see in our regional benchmarks, the districts that border us, all of our regional benchmarks do allow this type of transfer. And within the state, we have about a 50-50 split. Just a few, I think we have one more district there that does provide the transfer than those that do not. So a little bit of a blend there across the state. Overall, we did collect data from 42 districts and asked them whether or not they allowed this type of transfer, and 35 of the 42 surveyed from throughout the state. I didn't include them all here for you, but 35 of the 42 did indicate that they provide this benefit to employees in their policy. So if we did adjust the policy, what might it look like, or how might it be administered? First of all, from an eligibility standpoint, we would consider any employee of the school district that is currently contracted and holding a position which requires an educator's certification to be eligible to take advantage of the policy. So primarily, of course, the largest group we think about there are teachers, but these are going to be contracted employees in a certificated role. The students could transfer into the system into any building that is open for transfers that could accommodate the transfer based on the enrollment in that building. And continued transfer approval would be contingent upon the acceptable citizenship and discipline record of the student and the continued employment of that student's parent. So the transfer would be revocable in the event that the citizenship or discipline record caused any concern, or in the event that the student's parent's employment ended. Why would we do this? The benefits of allowing the type of transfer that we're talking about would be, first and foremost, as an employee recruitment and retention benefit, alignment with the goals of our strategic plan, which focus area 2, as you know, is all about empowered and effective teachers, leaders, and support personnel. And within that, we believe that the benefit of allowing this type of transfer would allow us to experience positive traction with regard to recruitment, retention, and satisfaction of employees. Also, we would serve more students. Our enrollment would potentially increase. We know it's not going to increase by that 634 number, but we do anticipate it would increase to some extent. And if we're able to serve more kids and provide additional services to students in Springfield, we think that that's a good thing. If we take a look at a little bit more information about enrollment, this is a graph that shows you the enrollment trend line of the districts that border us geographically from 1991 through today. Now it's a little tricky with the graph here. The axis on the left and right, you'll notice, are different. The axis on the left, the 1,000 to 7,000 range, represents all of the districts on that graph except for Springfield. So if you want to look at the trend of any of those districts below Springfield, you would want to be looking on the left-hand side of that graph to look at their enrollment. On the right-hand side, 5,000 to 25,000 represents Springfield. So if you wanted to look at Springfield's enrollment, you would be looking on the axis on the right. So visually, we did it that way, or I should say our quality improvement team did it that way, because if we didn't provide those two axes, there would be such a disparity in the graph that it wouldn't be meaningful or even visually, it wouldn't work visually for you. So what the takeaway from this data for us is that you can see the districts around Springfield are growing steadily for the most part. Certainly if we do a trend line right in the middle of all of those lines, we would see that the average enrollment is a steady trajectory upward from 1991 through present. And you can see that Springfield does not follow that trend. Our enrollment has remained relatively flat. So if we think about wanting to maintain a healthy system with healthy level of growth and how we might do that in the future, this is certainly an opportunity for us to potentially capitalize on additional enrollment in Springfield. So why would we be concerned about this type of benefit or this type of change? Potential concerns. The first concern that often we hear, or that we hear from potential stakeholders, is that there may be additional cost for serving students with special needs. And so what I wanted to try to do is give you just a very high-level picture of the way that costs are allocated for students with special needs, and attempt to project, again, kind of the maximum potential cost of students transferring into the system if they had special needs at the same percentage that our current student population has experiences special needs. So let me kind of walk through this with you. The first bullet here under the cost is talking about the High Needs Fund. So Springfield schools, as all districts in the state, are responsible for the provision of special education services for all students within the system that qualify, and we have to cover the cost of those services. However, we are eligible for reimbursement of costs if they exceed 3 times the expenditure per average daily attendee. And you'll recall from Ms. Embry's report just a moment ago that in Springfield, the cost per pupil per average daily attendee is $238.62. If we multiply that times 3, that would mean that if special education services reach $27,715, we're eligible for potential reimbursement from the state. In Springfield, 0.4% of our student body on average accesses the High Needs Fund. So 0.4% of our students are eligible or receive services that get high enough from a cost perspective to that level to be potentially eligible for reimbursement. Outside of that, we talk about other special students who receive special education services, and that could be a wide variety of students, maybe that some receive speech articulation only services all the way through cross-categorical, general special education services. There's a wide range you can see there from $10,000 to $27,000 per student, and on average 10% of our student body qualifies for special education services in this range. So if we take those two percentages, the 10% number that is experiencing a cost between $10,000 and $27,000, and the 0.4% number that is experiencing a cost somewhere over the high needs threshold, and we work to apply it to that 634 number, we can get a projected maximum potential cost for serving students with special needs that would be in addition to our current expenditure that we would incur by changing this policy. So that projected potential cost I have on the screen for you is $1.35 million. And again, we got there by just taking the percentages of our current student body that experiences special services or that receive special services and apply those same percentages to the 634 students that we're talking about. And again, I just want to emphasize that we know that that number would not ever happen in a single year. It would be extremely unlikely for that to happen in a single year just because we know we won't get all those students. It's just a maximum potential expenditure. When we talk about additional state aid, so additional revenue coming into the system, the state aid that we receive, which is a function of the state formula and Proposition C funding, is approximately $7,000 per student. If we multiply that multiplied by the 634 potential students, the potential state aid, again, assuming the maximum number of transfers, would be just over $4.4 million. We also know that eroding into that additional cost would be any cost associated with additional staffing that we would need in order to accommodate these students. And also, we're going to be experiencing the same per pupil expenditure that we do on all of our students that don't receive special services on those 634 students as well. So certainly, we're not saying that there's a margin. If we can't subtract one number from the other because there's going to be a variety of additional costs. But from a cost perspective, there would be enough state aid projected to cover the costs associated with providing education to these students in the way that we're looking at it here. The other major issue that we often hear about when we talk about this type of transfer is transportation. The transportation for students living outside the system would not be provided. It would be up to the family or the parents or the students themselves if they were able to drive to come into the system in a way that would work for them. In the event that we have an individualized education plan that identifies transportation as a related service, we would work with the family and the IEP team to come up with a solution for transportation that made sense for them. The district would still not be providing transportation in that case, at least not in the traditional sense that we talk about transportation in most circumstances, but we would work with that group of people to come up with a solution that would work for them. So with all this in mind, and before we ask you for your conversation on this issue, we wanted to give you just an administrative recommendation here, and that is to adjust the policy to allow the type of transfer that we've been talking about. And really, there's two main purposes for that, just to recap. The first is that we believe that it provides a significant positive traction in our strategic plan with regard to recruitment and retention of staff. Also, we recognize there are some potential liabilities. There is some additional cost, but the benefits outweigh the cost and the potential liability from our view. And so we think this is a good opportunity to serve students and a good opportunity to continue to do the good work that you get to hear about each month from our administrators and from our teachers and staff. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions and I hope that you'll have some dialogue and provide us some direction.
I'd just like to say thank you. I know when we first brought it up, we're going, oh, what do we want to do? And we need data.
Yes.
We need to know what the impact is. And you've done an excellent job of putting that together so we have something now to use in which to make a decision rather than just saying, oh gosh, let's toss a coin. So I feel much more comfortable now moving ahead with a decision based on the information you've given us.
Thank you.
I guess I got several questions, or two or three. One, why are we just limiting it to certified positions and not all employees? If it's good for that group, why wouldn't we do it for all employees?
Yeah, so a couple of reasons. First, employees that are certificated are contracted. And so we know that if we talk about enrolling students into the system, certainly there's a continuity that we want that student to experience. And in the event that we have a contracted employee that student is tied to, we know that at a minimum that enrollment is going to occur for that year because the employee is contracted for that year. In the event that we extend the benefit beyond contracted employees, we don't have that same assurance. There's a more frequent mid-year turnover for non-contracted staff. And again, we want to be able to provide that continuity. Secondly, we don't really know. I've done the best job that I can do of projecting the potential cost and how this might look if we implemented it in the system, but we don't really know until we do it, what it might look like and how it might impact the district and what the cost might be. And I think we want to wade into that carefully over time, and this is sort of a first step in doing that. And I think we would be open to continuing to monitor successes, failures, and revisiting eligibility down the road.
That is a concern for me, is why we wouldn't do it for all employees. The second one, or a couple of them, dealt with capacity and where the students would go to, where they'd be enrolled, where you've got, is that a choice by them? Or if you've got a capacity issue at the school, who gets first? I mean, how do you place the students in the buildings as to where they would be enrolled?
So these students would be treated like every other student within the district. So our district is open to transfers. It's an open enrollment system, so you have the ability to transfer if the district's capacity will allow that transfer. So that same parameter would apply to these students as well. If the district's open to transfers, they'd be eligible to transfer. Or if the building is open to transfers, they would be eligible to transfer. There would be no priority placement for these students. They wouldn't receive any additional priority beyond other students who are on transfer.
To add to that, would you give preference to someone already within the district who's moving in first, before then you would look at somebody from outside the district that wants to move to that building?
Okay, so I want to make sure I understand your question. Are you talking about a student who is already enrolled within Springfield schools that wants to transfer to a different building, and we're comparing that student to a student who is not currently within the district that's transferring in on this benefit?
Would they be given a priority from
I'm going to need
somebody?
help on that one. Dr. Harrell, did you hear the question? Yeah.
He
I
was
think our
playing
current
the song.
practice would, this is what we would want your feedback on if we built it up. We could build a preference, right?
But
At this
hadn't
point,
thought about that.
we don't have the policy written out with all of the procedures. That's why we're here seeking feedback. We think it's a good thing for staff. It's a good thing for our system. But what are the concerns that you have so we can construct the policy around potentially all employees, potentially
Devil's
making
in the
sure.
details.
Exactly. So that's why we're here tonight. We don't have all of the answers around exactly how that would play out. What are the things that concern you so we can build up a policy that meets the needs of the board as well as our employees? So those are good questions, and we can dig into creating that if necessary.
At least one, I just tag on to Jerry's concern that, what's good for one's good for the other. And I mean, I know you say, well, some might leave in mid-year. You could say they could stay for a year, but that's I don't think that's a big concern for me if they're leaving halfway a year. Did the 68% that say they would take advantage of it say they'd leave if we didn't implement this policy?
We didn't ask that question, and certainly, I think that we would know anecdotally that we're not going to lose that number of people if we don't do this. But I do think that the first number, which indicates that such a high percentage perceive it to be a benefit, tells us that that certainly it would contribute to a sense of satisfaction and retention. But no, we would not anticipate losing that many staff members if we don't do this.
And we don't have any data, or I think you've told us before, we don't really, or you didn't have the information to say previously when we didn't have this policy that was the reason teachers say they left is because they couldn't bring their children here. You didn't, it just wasn't collected.
We do ask upon exit why they're exiting the system, and we provide them, there are a number of categories from which they can choose, and then we provide them the opportunity to, if the category doesn't apply, they can indicate. I don't see a trend of that. This is not an issue that is brought up in that context. It is an issue that we hear just anecdotally throughout. It's something that kind of continues to come up. It came up through the bargaining process. It just continues to come up throughout conversations with teachers and principals, but it's not brought up in that context, no.
Kind of asking it in the opposite direction is for those that might leave because they didn't have that opportunity, how many do we find that want to seek positions in the Springfield district so that they can get their children into the district.
Yeah, and of course.
Is that ask upon interview? I mean, if that's of concern or interest, or if that's if there's
Currently,
impact?
they can't.
Right.
So currently, they can, so we wouldn't ask that question. Right, I mean.
But I guess, just simply in while they're being interviewed and they're seeking out, maybe they live in Willard, and I really want to be in the Springfield district because I have a child that has a special need, and by that I mean gifted or otherwise. And so, do we have any?
Yeah, so again, there would be, we want to cast as wide a net as possible in trying to survey that type of demographic, and there's just really no way. I mean, if you already have applied to Springfield schools, we'd be missing a really wide swath of people that don't apply because we don't currently provide the benefit. But I can tell you a bunch of stories we just hear all the time from people who say that they haven't applied in Springfield because this is the situation. We hear that kind of thing, but there's no way for us to project exactly how prevalent that is.
And then to clarify, a question about open enrollment or what's available or how the school would be chosen. Clarity on that in terms of, say, high school. Would the student be assigned to Kickapoo, or how do they ask, or how do they get permission to be enrolled there? I mean,
we'd have a transfer process just like we do with our current students that have the ability to transfer between buildings. They would indicate their interest on that transfer form, and it would be evaluated. If the parent meets the eligibility criteria, and if the building is open to transfers, meaning that there is enough capacity in that building to accept the student, then the transfer would be granted, assuming that it meets the other criteria that we established in policy and that we're looking to you to provide a little bit of direction on.
Any other questions?
Does Misha get involved with that at all?
That's another good question. Do you want to provide a little bit of context there? Dr. Harrell?
Depending on the age of the student and whether or not they're involved in extracurricular activities prior to, Misha could be a component of that, yes. So if they are a sophomore or older and have been involved in extracurricular activities because we are Misha at the high school level, that would affect their eligibility as a sophomore. If they were under the freshman year, that would not affect their eligibility.
And meaning that they would be ineligible over the sophomore year, ineligible to play varsity.
It would be based on transfer guidelines with Misha without some type of emergency request.
So the Misha rules would still apply for them,
yes.
the same as apply for transfers within the district. So,
Yes,
okay.
correct.
We're not voting tonight.
No, this is, and we have an
haven't even
opportunity.
constructed the policy.
They don't even have a recommendation.
Just looking for
us.
input and
Yep.
a general direction from the board.
I think Bruce has another.
I don't have any more.
Oh.
I don't have questions. I just probably have a statement, but I don't have any more questions.
Okay. Mr. Pro Temp, do you have anything? I have two. One, just so that I can picture what this looks like. So a parent teaches at McBride. They would like to have their child come to school at McBride, and McBride is closed for transfers. They could then select perhaps a school close by, Gray or Harrison, and they could transport their child in, drop them off at school, and then go into their building. Okay, so that's
correct.
That's what we're talking about. Then, is there an expectation that they stay within that feeder pattern? So if your child has attended Gray or Harrison or McBride, they will go on to Cherokee, and then they will go on to Kickapoo. Or is that the expectation? Because I think they should remain within their feeder pattern. Of course, I know we can't control that when someone moves
Right.
to another school.
Yeah,
but
so our transfer policy that applies to resident students would also apply to these non-resident transfers if we accept them as a transfer, meaning that as an open enrollment system, they have the ability to still transfer even as a resident student to a
Right.
different feeder patterns if they so chose, and that same benefit would be provided to these non-resident transfers.
That was my first question. My second one is, you did mention something about that the student can, or my question to you is, if the student does not, due to unacceptable citizenship, which I think that they may stay based on acceptable citizenship, if they do not, they're not good students, then so do they go through the same process that our students now to be expelled from the district? Or is it because they were on special transfer that it's less cumbersome to tell them you can no longer come to Springfield? Or how's that going to look?
Well, so first of all, the scope and sequence would still apply. All the disciplinary scope and sequence would still apply to these students as it does to our resident students. As far as the actual criteria for revoking this type of transfer based on citizenship or discipline, the policies that we've seen that provide that type of revocation are pretty generic and provide a great deal of discretion to the district to decide what constitutes citizenship or discipline that would warrant a revocation of the transfer. We could be more specific in the policy if we wanted to be, but I think that those are probably vague a little bit intentionally so that the district has the opportunity. As we often know, these cases are independently evaluated, and there are a variety of circumstances that make them each unique, and so we probably would want the ability to be flexible if we needed to be. But we
don't have any of those policies.
Correct.
We don't have anything in place, but I think the advantage is if it's clear language, then it's not subject to interpretation of what is unacceptable citizenship versus.
And yeah, absolutely. And I should mention that MSBA, who is our policy service, does have policy JECA in a variety of formats or options, and so we we can just say this is the type of transfers we would allow. These are the types of transfers we would allow, and they have template language that they would insert or they would propose to insert to allow this type of transfer, and that is fairly vague language. But again, we can be as specific as we want to be.
So you still have lots of work to do to bring back to us?
Absolutely, but I think we don't want to engage in that work if there isn't support from the board to provide this type of transfer, which is really what we're looking for tonight.
You want to make your comment now?
Yeah, I'm not in favor of it, and for a number of reasons. One, I pay taxes, and I pay school taxes very willingly. There are a number of people who don't pay it willingly, but I pay it willingly because it served me, it served my children, and it served my grandchildren to be in Springfield schools. I'm not in favor of paying my tax for somebody who chooses to live outside the district, and I think those are choices. I chose to live in Springfield. I didn't have to. My grandchildren are going to school here because they choose to live here, and so therefore that's why I pay taxes. And we just had a slide on over 65% of our revenue is local, which is local taxpayers paying taxes, and 27% comes from the state. On these students, we would be collecting some 27 more of the 27%, but not more of the local taxes. So, and when we look at that amount of money, I think that's a significant amount of money. But it really to me is about philosophical thing. If we think we're doing an excellent job in Springfield, which the board thinks we're doing, teachers stay here because they enjoy the things that are happening in our district. People keep their kids here because they can choose to leave, or they could choose to maybe pay tuition someplace else because that's an option for them. I think even the philosophical thing is more important to me than the money, because if I start getting down to how many people we add, and then because this year we had to add teachers because we thought there were going to be more students, and over the whole amount it didn't, if we added 150 out of 25,000, we wouldn't even know where they landed. We may not know where 500 of these kids will land because they're all not going to land in the same school in the same grade. So disperse that among 25,000. But every time we say we're going to have an increase, we get an additional request for more staff members to take care of that. And I think one of the slides said, here's the money to pay for that. so you won't have to worry about that, because it's gonna come from the state. I still think if we had enough money from that 27%, we would have we wouldn't have a 16% reserve, we'd have 100% reserve based on, we could pay for everybody based on state money alone, and we can't. It takes local people who live in Springfield who want to pay for education of the children, and my point is that ought to be those who have chosen to come here and be a part of this community.
Any comments?
Yeah, I think this is a good time for me to speak up, is that Bruce makes a lot of good points, and I certainly can honor that perspective, but I have a different perspective in that I would like to see us continue to look at this. I get the idea of people choosing to live in Springfield, like you, Bruce. I'm one of them too. But I see this as an investment in our people, and so I think it's possible to take a different view philosophically, but I certainly respect what Bruce is saying. But I just my perspective is different.
I mean, this is a lot for us to, a lot of information, a lot to think about. I think we've all heard stories both ways. I know recently I talked to a family that their parents taught in Springfield, lived outside of the district for financial reasons, got a little bit less expensive, which is what Bruce has been talking about, but their child did not have access to not special ed, but gifted education, and are all excited about the Ignite program. So of course my suggestion was move to Springfield, but I do believe this will attract some students of employees, but there just seems like there's still so many pieces and parts of this to be, details to be worked out. I don't know so what do you need from us now?
So we need a kind of a polling of, do you want us, right, to tell us one way or another to proceed? We can stop, you've got the data. We've kind of had one and one say, not interested, one interested in it, but is there enough interest on the board that we develop a full policy, we bring a presentation that gets into more of the details and the administrative procedures of the things that you guys have kind of brought up? Or do we say, why waste our time with this policy revision? So that's kind of what we're seeking, is just feedback, general feedback. Do we proceed with building something for full consideration, or do we stop? And if we get a split, I think we proceed and then fully bring it forward, and then you can have a full presentation of the consideration. So,
I guess one last question. You did mention this statistic: 95.7% of teachers that responded report they consider this a benefit.
Yes, 95.79% indicated that they would perceive it to be a benefit of their employment with Springfield to be able to do this.
So certainly, these are not all teachers that live outside of the district, but they're saying if they did live outside the district, this would be a benefit to them. And this has come up on regular occasion over the years in collective bargaining talks as a potential benefit.
This is the first time, this last round of bargaining is the first time it came up through the bargaining process that I recall, but it has just been a reoccurring conversation as we just talk with staff and leaders throughout the system.
So I think for the interest of what teachers believe might be a benefit, I think I can say that while I have lots of questions, I would be interested in pursuing additional information about this. Jerry?
I have some real concerns about it, but I think I'm willing to look at I have a real concern about it's just for certified teachers. That bothers me a lot. I don't think that's right, that it ought to be for everybody. But I guess I'm willing to look at a little more in depth before I would say yes or no. I don't know that it's that big a competitive advantage for us to do that, but I guess I'm willing to look at, see how the details, kind of devil's in the detail, let's see how that works out. I don't think I'm not ready to abandon it and not pursue it. I think we ought to pursue it and see what it looks like, but I'm not sure that I'm totally on board right at the moment, but I can be influenced on that with some data and the right process and procedures.
I feel like my short time on the board, but yet years passed, and then the role that the office that I held as county assessor, I can certainly speak to Mr. Renner's sentiments and certainly comments that I heard for years and years and years about those who continue to pay property taxes, that 80% of it was going to the schools. And some were very proud of that, and some were not very happy with that. And especially once their children were educated, some seemed to think that it was simply no longer a responsibility of theirs. But with that said, the idea that although we're talking about people, and that would be the one thing that would keep me going on saying let's pursue it. But I think being very sensitive to the taxpayers of the district and how they might feel about it, even if it was a small piece, I think is something not to be ignored.
I'm just saying, I understand there's certainly a conflict here, and I understand both points of view, but I'm happy to go ahead and continue down the road a little bit before we make a final decision.
So I think that we don't have Jill with us this evening.
Information we need, and we'll seek, and Jill's got the access to the presentation, and we'll seek her feedback also, but we'll proceed with more details, more information, a recommended policy version. We'll consult with MSBA. Obviously, we're not the only person that uses this practice, and we'll come back with more information and seek your feedback again and go from there.
So when you anticipate that? January?
Yeah, our goal is to be able to.
Session?
Yes, our goal would hopefully be to craft a policy that you could evaluate so that if it were approved, we could advertise in time for the recruitment process for the coming school year for teachers. So with that goal in mind, I think January or February would be our target.
Okay, so
That's what we need.
move forward and
Yes.
and thank you for the work you've done on this so far, but we don't mean to drag our feet on this, but this is a big thing.
It is a big decision, and I just want to say thank you for the conversation. It's not often that we ask you to have a full conversation, and we're not all from the same perspective, and we appreciate that, but I appreciate the dialogue and the feedback, so thank you.
Moving on to 9.01, let me stop at this time and see, the board, we started early at 4 o'clock with a legislative meeting, and then we went to a closed session. And so why don't we take just a short break? Is that okay with everyone? No, we don't want a break. Do we want a break? I'm seeing.
Me and Jerry.
Jerry's perfect. We're gonna take a short break.
Let's take a brief.
I thought it was.
business, Ignite Access Proposal. And we have before us our new information technology. I guess it's not all that new right now. It's an information technology director, Bruce Douglas.
Well, it's my privilege to be here tonight following our last presentation where we brought forward the Hillcrest students, and we kind of gave you a preview of what we did there, and we're coming forward with a larger recommendation for our second semester today. So it is Dr. Hackenworth's requirement to come up here every time and remind you what Ignite is and is not, and then it's my requirement to come up here and remind you of the hierarchy of digital needs. So I just bring this up again to remind us that we are still focused on providing that access for all students. So we have that device plan together. of how we're going to affect students in getting the devices they need in the classroom. But we know that there's also that other goal of providing Wi-Fi at home for students that don't have that. We understand that is a huge gap and a huge need for our students. So I just want to highlight that we're still at that access level of talking about equity for our students to ensure the best learning environment possible. So looking at our Year 1 Ignite schools, we are able to, through Bright Bites, determine about how many students we have in this area. So looking at just those schools, 84% of our students reported that they have some sort of internet access at home. So that really works out to be about 800 students that do not have that access at home, which is a fairly significant number. And we know that the ability to access the internet, especially with the devices we've chosen, is critical. So our first pilot with this was with Hillcrest. So coming back from our last presentation, we had deployed 66 Chromebooks. We had done our first step in gathering information around providing internet access to these students by deploying 20 Khajiit smart spots. We did focus groups, and we got a lot of feedback off of that process. And I think we saw the impact that can have off of our last presentation when Zach came up here, gave his story of being an independent student that is supporting himself, doesn't have the ability to pay for internet, and now he's graduating here in just a couple weeks. So I think that highlights why all of us are in this room today, and also the stories that we can really impact here. So that's one story. We had 19 others at Hillcrest, and we know that we've got several hundred more that we have out there to affect. So with all of that in mind, the recommendation that we're coming forward with tonight is kind of twofold. So we see this as a proof of concept for our second semester. We know that this is a new area. This is something that we really want to explore, make sure that we are finding the right products and pieces to make this work for our students. So the recommendation is for 500 more of the Khajiit smart spots. So that's the device that we used at Hillcrest. It provides us SEPA compliant filtering. It provides us about 500 megs of bandwidth a day for the students. And we have seen really good feedback from our students. We know there's things that they didn't like as much about it. And that's why we come back with also coming in with 50 Sprint hotspots. And this is through a program that they have for education called the Hotspot Lending Program. So it's $37.99 a month for unlimited access. It does allow us a different type of filtering, which is another reason why we're interested in exploring this option. So we're wanting to get as many different options out there, excuse me, to ensure we've got the right thing for our students. So we don't believe in silver bullets, so we want to keep that exploration open. We will start our deployment at Hillcrest. So as we come back from break on January 4th, again, we'll invite you out there. That's when we're deploying Hillcrest in the morning. So all those students are gonna get their Chromebooks on that day. Shortly after that, we'll come back to Hillcrest and we'll start deploying these hotspots out to students in need. We know that the application process to receive this type of internet access has gotta be really fleshed out, and we have to find all the different ways that we could identify which students truly need this. So what we did in the pilot was kind of just offer it up for self-identification, and that's not the same process that we would take forward. We know that we need parental and guardian input throughout the process. We need students to be able to still provide the reflection that they need this type of internet access at home. We also will have to rely on our building staff, our teachers, our counselors, and our other certified staff in the buildings that are serving our students every day. Will have a really good insight into which students truly need this type of access, so we can provide it to the right students at the right time. So we know that is going to be a big process, and we know that's going to be something we have to work very closely with our schools on developing. So throughout this spring semester, we'll again come back and collect more feedback. So we'll continue student focus groups. So the students that receive these hotspots, we'll bring them in, we'll get more feedback, we'll continue that process of making sure we're listening to their needs. We also understand that parental and that guardian feedback is so important as well. So we have to get that to ensure success, because if that's not something that a parent wants in their household, we're not going to be successful in that program. So we need to always have that at the forefront throughout this process, and then we can also monitor usage on these devices. So what we found through our Hillcrest pilot is some students would get it, and then a few weeks later they'd get internet at home. And they understand that this is not the same type of internet that they get at home. It's not open. They can't go and get on Facebook with these type of things. So the internet that they can have at home is a benefit compared to this device. So once they got that, they're like, I don't need this anymore, and we were able to repurpose that for other students. So monitoring that usage and having those conversations with those students and parents will be another part of this proof of concept in the spring semester. So that brings us just to our next steps. So working on that application process is going to be really huge. We'll work with Hillcrest as our first spot, and then we'll work on how we deploy that out throughout the rest of the Ignite Year 1 schools, probably starting with the middle schools after that, seeing how many families we're affecting through that, as we're also going to work to identify families that have multiple students and can hopefully reach as many as possible with these hotspots. Additionally, that feedback collection will be so important, and we will use that feedback to develop a recommendation for the next school year. So we know a little bit. We need to know a lot more before we come back and look at what a larger investment in this looks like. So with that, any questions that I can answer for you tonight?
I may have missed it, but the Khajiit monthly cost is what?
So we do get some staggered pricing on it. So we would be paying around $34, $35 at the.
It's about the same as the.
Yeah, it's about $4 cheaper than Sprint a month. So whenever you expand that out, it can be a significant cost savings.
And you're evaluating the filtering on both to see which is most effective, then, I guess.
Yeah, filtering, and the Khajiit use the Verizon network versus the Sprint, which uses the Sprint network, ensuring proper coverage and all those items as well.
So Bruce, what kind of contract would we be going into with Verizon and with Sprint for these 550?
Mm-hmm. So on the Khajiit Smart Spots, it's actually a lease program. So we would have a 6-month lease. So we don't actually purchase the hardware. So once that lease is up, the hardware would go back if we're not happy with the Khajiit. So we have that for 6 months. That would start sometime in January, depending on when we're it. Sprint actually goes through what's called the WISCA contract, which is a state consortium contract, and there's actually no terms and conditions. So if after 1 month with Sprint we're not happy with it, we would be able to jettison. Yep.
Any other questions? While you're thinking, I have one that I'll ask. So I just, so you will have some process to qualify need in place by this deployment at Hillcrest?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you'll have something in place. It may not be what it's going to look like for next year, but you do have some process in place. These will be handed over to students that there is some qualification of need, and that will be done by teachers, counselors,
yeah,
staff at Hillcrest.
definitely.
Is that
lots of
ongoing
input.
now? So of these 550, you pretty much know who qualifies for one of these devices. So you're not just going to be handing them out because a student says, "Oh, I need one."
Yeah, that's not what we're going to do here. So the process has to have a lot of input from the parent as well, especially once we get into the lower grade levels. I'm definitely not handing it out to the elementary, starting with Hillcrest.
This is just the 550 that we're looking at tonight. This is just for Hillcrest students.
No, actually, this will be for all Ignite Year 1 schools. So Hillcrest, we identified about 220 students. We're starting there, and then we're going to develop that process, and we're going to call that 1.0 because we know that process is going to look completely different by the time we get to a recommendation for next year. We'll work with Hillcrest on how that works. Part of it will be student evaluation. So we had other independent students like Zach that would be able to, lodge a request to get this type of device. We know that other ways will need to be identified as well. And so we're looking at multiple ways to get these students identified. And then once we identify that, then the process of actually checking these out, monitoring that usage will begin.
So we're looking at, you're looking at starting a lease. If we approve this evening, you're going to start a lease, the 6-month lease and the other lease for the 50 starting immediately.
In January. So the lease wouldn't take effect until we actually receive the devices. We've been given about a 4 or 5.
You'll have the students selected by then, so they will all be going out to students sometime in January.
Yeah, so we would start that identification process with our deployment at Hillcrest, which is that January 4 date, and we will start to get those identified. I'm not sure exactly how many we're going to have at Hillcrest right off the bat. So we'll try to get those out as quickly as possible. My anticipation is that we'll probably get 150 to 200 of those out within that January timeframe. We'll start moving into those middle schools as soon as possible. So I would not anticipate a long wait between that, because we want to go ahead and get these out so we can get that feedback. That's the piece we're really looking forward to.
Since we're paying on that lease, we just don't want them sitting.
Yeah, exactly.
Sitting around somewhere until someone can.
Yeah.
We want to get them out. Yeah.
Question on the Hillcrest pilot and the focus group, the weekly focus groups that you had. Did that include parents, or was that just students?
That was just students.
That was just, okay.
Yep.
Then my question wasn't applicable.
That was a quick turnaround.
My question was going to get, what kind of concerns have you had from parents or questions about the hotspots? Have you deployed it? What's been some of their concerns with the process?
Yeah, we haven't had anything systemic on that.
Okay.
Just some
Too early.
one-off conversations that it's been pretty positive. So, and the Bright Bites survey in the fall, we had a parental portion of that, and I believe that we had about 90% of our parents come back and say that they value technology in their education, their students' education.
I would assume it would have been very positive. I was just curious what some of the concerns that you're hearing.
It'll be interesting when we start hearing those, yeah.
So we've got $108,000 fiscal note on this. How are we able to afford this?
This is coming out of the information technology budget.
Was this a new expense though? Was this something that we budgeted all along? And
we had planned to do something around this, so we had set aside some of the funding that we had put forward on charging devices for Ignite. So there was some planning on that to start with.
so this is within those numbers?
Yeah, it's not an additional expense.
The other thing that's allowed it to happen is when we went through device selection at Hillcrest, we had budgeted for a more expensive device because a lot of the trends in other schools was a higher priced device. The feedback from students said this device is meeting our needs, so let's go down to this lower cost price, which gives us a little bit of breathing room that would allow us to invest more in this. It also allows us, as we think of scale and the Ignite budget that was originally put together, if we continue that trend, it allows us to scale out into multiple sites and expand hotspots if necessary over the multiple years.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the 6-month lease to Kajit for 500 smart spot devices.
Thank you. We have a motion by Annie Bush that the board gives approval to approve 6-month contract with Kajit and to provide 500 smart spots and the 50. Is this including and the 50?
The other one's a smaller contract, so it's not part of this.
Okay, so that's not a part of this, just the 500 at this time at a fiscal note of $108,480,000. Okay, so I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Jerry Lee, so we will vote at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to 9.02, 2014-15 financial audit.
Good evening again. I would like to say a few things before I invite our representative from Westbrook & Company to the podium to provide you with a presentation. We did do things a little differently this year, and we held that special meeting so that you could, in closed session, meet with the auditor and discuss some of the things from the audit. And at this time, I want you to know that this is I believe my 25th audit experience. And in that period of time, I have encountered, in working in 3 different districts, encountered 5 different auditing firms. And I will say to you that we often talk in education about rigor and being rigorous in our instruction. And that is the perfect word to define the auditors with Westbrook & Company. They provide one of the most thorough, accurate, extensive audits that a district would invite a company to come in and perform. And if I were a board member in your seat, this is exactly the company I would want performing my financial audit because of the work that they do. In saying that, I'll invite Diana Klosterman to the podium. So it's probably not appropriate for me to say it's a bit love-hate with regard to the people on staff, because it's a lot of hard work, and but it's very much worth the process and that which we learn through it. So I'm looking for, I think it's here. Here we go. So Ms. Klosterman has been with the Westbrook Company for in excess of 14 years.
Yes,
and turn this over to her. She's a partner with the firm.
Thank you so much. Good evening.
Good evening.
Like Carol said, my name's Diana Klosterman. I've been a partner at Westbrook and Company for several years. The gentleman that started our firm was Rick Westbrook, and he's taken it a little bit easy, and with the addition of several partners, and he graces us with his presence occasionally, but we partners are the ones that head up the audits now. We have 28 employees. We have offices in Richmond and Carrollton, Missouri. Those are small rural communities. It allows us to keep our overhead low and pass on those savings to our clients. Westbrook and Company has, I think this past year, audited 43 public and charter schools. We also do bookkeeping for another dozen charter schools. So I feel like that's a huge benefit to our auditees, because we're actually in the trenches all year long doing the same thing that our clients are doing. Back when we got all that ARA money that flooded the school districts, we spent hours and hours researching how to be compliant with that and transparent with that revenue and that expenditure reporting. And so we really feel like when we're doing your audit, while, like Carol said, we're rigorous and tough and all the other words that goes along with that, we're also partners. We understand what it takes to bookkeep in a fund balance type environment and under the requirements of DESE. And DESE is backed by the state statute. So when we're out doing your audit, we're looking at compliance with all those things associated with the public school district. We have 10 auditors that actually take turns going out and doing the audits. We change our auditors up either in the position that they hold out on the audit or on the various audits that we do. That allows us to put fresh eyes on the financial statements. Some of our clients, we've had them for 10 or 15 years, but still been able to give them those fresh eyes that they expect from an audit firm. And I think that's important, and we continue to do that. Next year, you'll see new faces on your audit. We brought our peer reviewer with us this year, and that's because you all changed from accrual to cash, and we wanted our peer reviewer that is the specialist in that area to come out and do technical review right in the field. So we knew when we left we had all of our ducks in a row, if you will. What I'm going to do this evening is just talk about the financial statements for a few minutes, and then I'll be on my way. If you have questions, let me know, and we'll touch on them as we go. A reminder, we did a financial statement audit for you. You'll see where we have a report on internal controls, but we don't opine on your internal controls. If we see things that you could shore up or strengthen, we'll share those with you. But you won't have an opinion from us on your internal controls like you would where the state auditors will look at your policies and your procedures and the application of those and state statute and such. We don't opine on those, but we'll sure share with you if we see things you ought to work on a bit. So this evening I'm going to start with the financial statements. And if you all want to follow along on the screen, at the bottom of each screen you'll see what page I'm on in your booklet. And so I'm on page 1, which is right behind the table of contents, and this page and this section out of the page indicates that your financial statements were presented fairly in all material respects. That's a clean opinion on your financial statements, and remember, you guys are on the cash basis this year, you were on accrual last year, and so when I make some comparisons, I'll point that out as we go. I'm going to move all the way over to your statement of activities. Your statement of activities is kind of a convoluted statement, if you will. When we that are in business expect to see revenues, expenditures, and net income or net loss. Your statement of activities starts with your expenditures on the left-hand side, and it presents in order of your activities that you offer in your governmental environment of a school district. And you can see there their instruction and student services and transportation. They're not phone bills and utilities and things such as that. And so each one of the activities that you offer in this school district are in that listing. As a matter of fact, if you slide on down there to where I have it red box, you see community services. What's that? That's anything outside of K-12. So that could be parents as teachers. It could be VOTEC if you had that. It can be early childhood education. You actually use some of your Title I. If you looked over there at community services in your operating grants and contributions, part of that $2.5 million is Title I money that is pigeonholed to early childhood education. And so as you slide down through there and move over to the right, you'll see that some of those activities and their related expenses also have some revenues associated with those in the form of charges for services, operating grants, and capital grants. When you get to the far right-hand side, you'll see brackets around most of those. When you get to the bottom, you see a negative $274 million. That is covered by your general revenues, your property taxes, sales taxes, basic formula, earnings on investments, those sorts of things. The reason I have those two areas red boxed is because on those activities, that's the only place you can break even in a school district. Food service and community services. And both of those broke even this year. And so good job on that. Food services is a tough one, especially in the environment where we're in, where you're expected to serve those healthier lunches and the kids are like, man, I just want some chicken strips. And so we've seen some differences in those food service revenues over the past couple of years. It's hard for me to do an analytic on food service whenever there's such a fluctuation based on the preferences of the students. And so it's been tough to audit. So we audited a bit deeper now on food service. We go down and we calculate what you should have gotten before we ever look at your revenue and then compare it to see if it's reasonable. So we spend a fair amount of time on food service even in the years we don't audit as a federal program. Community services, we'll continue to get out and visit various areas where you expend district funds on those outside of K-12 services and see how those are controlled as far as internal controls over those areas. Some new things on this statement, though, that if you were to compare to previous year, your transportation or costs are higher when you compare them to the previous year. That's because you're on cash basis now, and school buses are actually in your in your transportation expense, which they haven't been before. They've been pulled out to a capital asset. You'll notice your facilities and acquisition is on here now, where it wasn't in previous years. And then you'll notice your principal retirements. This is pure cash basis financial statement now. All the money that went out is actually represented here on the financial statement. This is your balance sheet. This looks a little bit more normal to us. We see our assets, we see our liabilities, and all we've got here is a pure cash basis balance sheet, and you've got your cash and cash equivalents. If you slide over to the far right-hand side, you see you have $189 million worth of cash and cash equivalents. When y'all implemented GASB 54 a couple of years ago, you needed to tell the readers how much of that $189 million is actually available to pay the day-to-day bills. So you had to add a footnote to your financial statements and say, okay, that $189 million, only out of your general fund, that's $36 million is available to pay your day-to-day bills. And I'm all the way back on page 20, note L. The rest of those funds are already pigeonholed for something. In the general fund, student activities are pigeonholed. Debt service, that money's already set aside to pay down your debt. And in that $109 million is about $88 million that's sitting there in escrow waiting to pay off your 2006 bond that's going to come due or get called in March of 2016. And then over there in Fund 4, you see all that money is up there in either restricted or in committed already. So we're telling the readers of the financial statements of that total cash and cash equivalents, $36 million is available to pay your day-to-day bills. This is your statement of revenues, expenditures, and fund balance. As we see again, we see our four funds, and let's slide all the way to the bottom where I have that red box, and we just want to see what happened to our fund balance. And you can see in Fund 1, it increased by about $7 million. Debt service had a couple of things going on in there. You paid off a 2005 bond, and you see that you actually have some new bond proceeds. That was refunding bonds. We know that because it was deposited to Fund 3, turned right around and paid off your 2005 bond. And then over in the Capital Projects Fund, we see that $2 million transfer over to Fund 4 that Carol talked about earlier in her presentation. As she was doing her presentation, I was following the financial statements to make sure those all matched up. I didn't see any differences. And so what we do is we audit the district. But then when we get all done, we compare our audit to your ASBR. We want to make sure that those presentations are the same, and they are. But we don't start with your ASBR, we finish there. All right, all the way back on page 15 is note G, and that's your all of your bonds that you have out there and what happened this year and what's going to happen in the next year. And you can see down there, that's that 2015 refunding bond. And if we slide up to the top, we see that big retirement up there of the 2005 bond. If you slide over on the 2006 bond, you see there's where you're going to be paying that $88 million out of those escrowed funds. It's already there and ready to cover that expense. And you'll see that on your amortization schedule. Look at 2016. It's got total principal payments of $94 million. So you're going to pay off that 2006 next year. All right. We like graphs. I think it's a nice pictorial so you can look and see what's happening between your local, county, state, and federal revenue. And so you can see here, and I checked these numbers with Carol's numbers, and they looked pretty close. Even when she was going forward into the 15-16 year, 64% of your total revenue is local. If you look at 2015 and compare it to 14, you had a little drop there. In 14, you had some premiums on bonds that increased that revenue that you didn't have in 14-15. You had your property taxes stayed pretty flat, but sales tax increased by about $1 million. When we look, we see a little bump in state revenue. Most of that's basic formula. And you see an increase in federal. And what I want to say to you there is, on federal revenue, there's a lot to do with timing. Whenever you submit your final expenditure report and you draw down your last monies in June, you don't get any more of your money on federal programs until you submit your final expenditure report. So those can fluctuate a bit from year to year. And you have to submit your payment transmittal by mid-June, right? Something like that. So there's going to be some more expenses through the end of the fiscal year. This next slide is your expenditures. Now, so that we don't cloud anything, we don't include your capital outlay in there that's directed towards facilities and acquisition, because we don't want to blow up the slide. And so as you look there, Carol had indicated that salaries and benefits made up 80% of your total expenditures, and our slide tracks with that. So this is a nice pictorial of where all of the money of the district is going. Here's your reserves, and you can see your reserve grid. We went ahead and pulled 6 or 7 of your financial statements and dropped those in so you could see the track of how your reserve ratio has looked over the past 6 years. You can see that your reserves this year are 16.9% or 9.6%. That's 2 years of reserves. You can operate 2 months, I'm sorry, of reserves. But you can operate for 2 months without having any revenues come in and still pay your day-to-day bills. So 2 months of reserves, let me reiterate that. And here's your ADA, your average daily attendance. This year you're at 23,241. That's a bump of about 107 when compared to the previous year. So remember, you got more basic formula money that ties directly to your attendance. And that's the reason we spend so much time auditing attendance. We want our schools to get every penny they can get as far as the attendance numbers are concerned. We also look at your compliance with Missouri laws and regulations, and what we say here is that your representations that you applied with Missouri laws and regulations was fairly stated. We didn't see any material non-compliance. What's that about? That's attendance, transportation, budget. Are you coding your expenses properly according to the DESE manual? We saw no material non-compliance there. We saw some immaterial instances of non-compliance that had to do with attendance. I think attendance is going to be a lot better next year and a lot more easily reconciled to the underlying reports, because your software company is going to provide you with some definitive reports that's going to help you with that process. So I anticipate that attendance, this comment will probably go away next year. We spent some time with your folks and actually let them know how we audit. And so I think that'll help them tie out their underlying information to what was submitted to DESE. All right. I alluded to the fact that we don't opine on internal controls. We don't. But we will let you know if we saw any material weaknesses in your internal controls. The team here in the finance department is large enough that you're able to segregate out duties to individuals so that one individual does not have care, custody, and control of district assets. That's a bad thing. You don't have that here. So we saw no material weaknesses in your internal controls. We'll continue to look at those every single year that we're here. We're going to go different places when we're here. I spent some time at your high school this year, one of your high schools, and I'll wander about your district and go ask questions, and it's always a little scary when I show up, but I get good information when I actually go out and see how the procedures are working in the field, so I'll continue to do that. We had to audit your federal programs this year, and this year we audited food service and special education. Even though we audited food service as a material program or a major program this year, we're still going to look at food service every single year. Even when it's not audited as a major program, that doesn't mean we ignore it. Even though we didn't audit Title I this year, we still looked at your final expenditure report and compared the underlying expenses and made sure that there was support for your final expenditure report. This year we took some time to focus on your special education section to make sure their maintenance of effort was prepared properly, because DESE's changed the rules on that this year. So we wanted to make sure you were applying those properly. And what we indicate here is that we didn't find any findings related to your financial statements, and we didn't also find any findings related to your major programs. Remember, major programs have 14 compliance requirements associated with those, and we have to test those to make sure you're spending that money appropriately and following all those rules that's associated with the receipt of those federal funds. All right, that's the financial statements, really fast and brief. Do you all have any questions for me?
Yes. And it's geared toward the reserve, the
Yes.
reserve amount, which this board's worked really hard over the last several years to get our reserves up to that level. And I know statewide reserves are all over the board.
Right.
I mean, I've seen 40s, I've seen 5s, I've seen reserves all over. For our size of district, is that 16, 17% a reasonable 2 months worth, in your opinion, a reasonable reserve? Is it too high, too low? Is it right on target? I'm just curious from your perspective.
Let me tell you about
First
the
one coming
range-
in.
The range first. So I've seen them as low as 3%. That's when a district ends up on the distress list. No one wants to be there. I've got a district that's up in the 140, 150s because they have a ton of local revenue. Then their state revenue goes away. So what's the happy spot? Carol talked about the fact that you all didn't have to take a tax anticipation note. That's the goal, is to have enough reserves not to take a tax anticipation note. In my opinion, taking a tax anticipation note is kind of like using your credit card to buy your Thanksgiving dinner. You know, you want to be able to pay your bills when they come due without having to borrow short-term money. You didn't have to do that this year. So it seems like your reserves are adequately supporting the ability to pay your bills on time and not have to borrow money to do so. That's the goal. Boards will set any number from 15% to 24% typically as their goal to have their fund balances. Sometimes they can't do that. You know, if they have large growth, it's a lot easier. Some of the school districts that I audit that have a 200 or 300 ADA increase every single year, it sure is easy to keep those reserves lined out. And like one of your people spoke about, your all's ADA is pretty flat. And so it makes it a little bit more difficult to maintain those higher reserves. Any other questions? All right. Well, I do want to say thank you to Carol and her crew, especially Kim. Kim was our point person and provided the information that we asked for in a timely manner. We were here 3 days the first week, 2 days the second week, and we were here for a day to preliminary determine what we were going to do while we were out here. All the information came to us quickly. We were quite demanding. We asked for a lot of information, but then we can give you the type of report that we give you. I know that the folks in Carol's department had a little bit of culture shock when we sent over our list, and you're like, oh, all my list is done, and then we just hand out another one. And as we pick our federal program. So it was tough for everyone, but I know they'll get used to us, and it's going to be a good relationship, and I hope a long one. So we sure do appreciate you bringing Westbrook on. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just grateful for a thorough, comprehensive audit and a great report back. Helps me understand a lot more about what needs to be done and how. It reinforces what a good job Carol and her staff are doing. And I just feel very secure. It's good to have new eyes, as you said, on what's going on and some new perspectives. So thank you for a great job.
You're welcome. Thanks so much.
And one last thing I'll just mention is that I had an opportunity to spend about 30 minutes with the team, and so everyone knows I felt sufficiently grilled. Professionally and politely, but grilled. So they did a great job. Thank you. Safe travels.
Thank you.
Okay, so at this time, sorry, I'm still thinking about all that. Anything else, Carol, that you want to bring forward?
I think I don't think I have another comment to make other than it was just exhausting.
Okay. So I guess at this time, we've had our chance for some questions. If we don't have any other comments, do I hear a motion that the board accepts the 2014-15 financial audit as presented by Westbrook and Company, PC?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion by Jean Twitty, a second by Tim Rosenberry. At this time, we do need to vote.
Mine disappeared. There it is.
Oh, mine came back.
Twice.
Yeah.
This is like
You might have
Chicago.
14
Would you
votes
vote
there. I
twice?
think mine came up twice.
Yeah.
We'll only count it once.
We got it?
Do it again.
We'll just count it as twice.
as soon as I see. We need a Khajiit. Very good, thank you. Voting is complete. Moving on to 9.03, Committee for Naming Sunshine Office Building. Again, Carol and Bree, thank you.
We have a board policy, and it's FF, and it speaks to facility names and the process by which the Board of Education shall do that. And while I believe in my heart of hearts that that policy is intended for school buildings, it applies to any of our facilities. So this evening, we are talking about 1610 East Sunshine, the new administrative office that was purchased and renovated and now houses a large portion of our administrative staff. And this evening, I am providing to you a list of representatives to form the committee and seek your approval for this committee. This group would meet to identify suggestions with regard to the name of that facility. And the list being presented to you this evening includes Mr. Jim Anderson as a community member, Mr. Mike White, community member, Dr. Justin Harrell, Executive Director of Student Services, Mrs. Phyllis Wolfram, our Executive Director for Special Programs. And then we also have two students, a Carver Middle School student and a Glendale High School student, who have been identified to serve on the committee. The requirements of the policy indicate community membership, faculty, and students.
Okay, any questions or comments? Okay, moving on then. At this time, we need a motion that the board appoint the committee as presented for purpose of recommending appropriate names for the facility located at 1610 East Sunshine.
So move.
Thank you. Bush, do we have a second?
Second.
Jerry Lee. At this time, we'll vote. We'll be excited to see what they come up with. Okay, moving on to unfinished business. 2016-2017 school calendar. Dr. Anderson is with us.
Good evening. It's good to be back with you to bring you round two for the second read of this. And so we want to, for those that are out there in live streaming land, as well as any that are joining us first time, just to give a quick refresher about where we started and where we are landing this evening based upon your approval. So just a quick review over the process and parameters. We want this to be a stakeholder representative group and discussion, and so we make sure and include all interested parties, all represented parties at some level, and we look at calendar options, and we start with a grand mass of options and narrow it down to what we think is the best opportunity for learning for our students, as well as looking at what's convenient for staff and teachers, as well as parents in supporting their students' learning. So we brought to you A and B calendar. This is just a quick picture of A that we brought to you last time, with the focus that is really a cut and paste of this year that we are currently in. Really not any difference except for a extended window for the parent-teacher conference week and a week later spring break. And we also proposed to you B, very same features, and the difference there is that we had a floating professional development or learning development day that would be contracted by site, and decided upon that. So after we continued the discussion from previous time and gathered more input, and we also presented to you what our calendar outlines might look like for the next 3 years as well. And this was extremely beneficial to our other partners in education. In fact, within the day after the first read came out, had discussions with all of the universities and colleges, and they said, thanks for getting this out, we can align to you. And I thought that that was a great outreach on their part, so it just makes life easier for all involved. So we appreciate those ongoing conversations. So tonight we bring to you, on behalf of the committee, recommendation that of calendar B for the recommended that you can take a vote on tonight. And I have some key wins and some key challenges that specific calendar will need to address, as some opportunities provide us some opportunities to learn. So the key wins here are that extended parent-teacher conference window that we discussed about, spring break closer to spring than winter is always good, a floating learning collaboration day to be chosen by site. This one was probably the tipping point in that, between those discussions of groups, and by and large, this was favored by a majority of the calendar committee stakeholders, including our teacher representative group, who with their board, they unanimously supported that option. And so I think that's important to note. We are able with this calendar to provide an Ignite Day. And so with 1/3 of our schools going through that Ignite opportunity to bring these devices and that great story that we heard last time, we were able to build that in without it significantly impacting our beginning teacher days as they set up, and that's built in to support them. This also honors November 8th election, which is going to be a big day across the nation for us. So some key challenges to address that came with this calendar is, one thing that we are always doing is looking to ways to support learning development and collaboration opportunities. We have 185 teacher contract days. 3 of them are paid, so that our teachers can enjoy Thanksgiving, Christmas Day, and New Year's Day as a paid holiday. That gets us down to 10 days, and when we include 4 work days for our teachers, we start to narrow down quickly those collaboration days and learning opportunities. So we have to be very specifically we have to be specifically ready to go with our training and make sure we're making the difference in supporting them. This will develop the site leaders and the teachers' capacity around that floating collaboration day. The challenge with the January 3rd floating day is that we are going to have to come up with a backup plan in case it's a nasty inclement weather day, and in case we would call off school and we don't want those folks traveling. So what is the specific plan going to be by site, so we don't give them just work time, but work together time specific around a cause is our challenge there. And so we need to be ready to pivot to respond to any of these unforeseen outcomes that we haven't yet experienced because it is so new to us. So those are the things that came up as we have some opportunities with this calendar, but we think it's the right thing, and we are so appreciative of all of the committee members that gave their input to this. Also before you is the Robertson Community Calendar. When discussing Robertson, we know that we have the same number of student contact days and the same number of teacher contract days. They are just more evenly distributed, and you can see there it's kind of in the orangish color that we have intercessions at those sites to provide more learning experiences. And especially when we talk about the work that we have been doing as part of the city with Northwest Corner and what we are trying to do to address poverty, this is something that they are interested in, and they are interested in us growing that opportunity. This might continue to provide a basis for us to plant the seed at doing a community type school schedule at other sites down the road. So at this time, if you have any questions to follow up on that, otherwise we will leave it in your hands, as the committee has come up with our what we desire, but it is now in your hands to do that. Once it is approved, and if it is approved, we have the calendar ready to go that has the draft taken out, that has the letter B taken out, so that we can start disseminating that to families and students and parents for next year. Questions, thoughts, concerns?
The thing we note is the Fremont, as we get ready to reopen that site, we're investigating what's the right calendar. Is just the district calendar? Is a Robertson type? Is there a different kind of, we don't have an answer to that yet, so we're beginning conversations with staff and community around those things. So if it is different, then we would bring that to you in the spring. But at this point, we don't have that formalized.
Any other comments or questions about this process or the calendar? Okay, so at this time, do I hear a motion that the board approves the calendar for school year 2016-17 as attached, or formerly known as Calendar B?
So moved.
Thank you. Motion by Tim Rosenberry. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Jean Twitty. This time we'll vote. And we know a tremendous amount of work went into this process, and I heard so many positive things from a variety of district staff about how they appreciated being a part of this process from the very beginning on through to the end. So
That's why the motion was so easy to make.
thank you. Vote is complete. Moving on to 10.02, Energy Conservation Services. Again, Carol Embry.
This is a business meeting. That explains it, right? I had anticipated that I would be coming forward this evening with a recommendation in response to the RFP that was let for energy conservation services in our system. I explained to you previously that we had a committee evaluate and also interview the respondents to the RFP, and that interview process took place the week of November 16th. We've been in the process now of evaluating the information and also obtaining reference check information. And the next step will be that we continue another conversation with the members of the committee and ensure that we have an appropriate cost-benefit analysis prepared for you, as would be our standard operating procedure. So, all that to say, I'm not ready. We aren't ready, and we'll basically be bringing this back to you, we anticipate, at the next board meeting, which would be a work session at the January 5th meeting. So, if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to entertain those. Otherwise, just know we're in process, doing a thorough job of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to 11.01, public comments. At this time, the Board of Education allows comments on those topics that are not related to our printed agenda items. Mrs. Loon, we do have comments this evening? We have two. Okay, so just let me, just as a reminder that comments are limited to 3 minutes for each speaker and will be timed by Mrs. Luton. You will note that she puts a little timer on the screen, both screens, and so you can track your time. It is inappropriate to address the board about individual students or individual staff members by name in an open meeting. If you have concerns about individuals, these concerns should be addressed through the appropriate administrative supervisors, either in the schools or in our district office. And so at this time, we do have a request to address the Board of Education from Mr. Aaron Brummett. Mr. Brummett, please come forward. Thank you.
I get 3 minutes? Is that what we said?
Yes,
3
and
minutes.
you can, we'll have a little timer running here for you.
Absolutely. Well, I'm here, I guess, kind of as a dissenter. Dissenters are sometimes the highest form of patriotism in our country, and I'm here just to speak on the issue that's been spoken on about 6 years ago, I believe, concerning the issue of Christmas being taken out of the school agenda and from the calendar. And so that's what I'm going to be addressing, so you know where I'm coming from. And I'm also a pastor here in Springfield, Missouri. I pastor Lighthouse Baptist Church. I graduated from Missouri State University. I'm a firm believer in education. My mother was a public school teacher for many years. And so I believe that what we're doing here is very important. So I'm here, I'm not angry with anybody, but I think this is something that needs to continue to be addressed. Hopefully every year somebody will be here to address this issue. I'm going to read something here very briefly. 2 minutes and 2 seconds. On December 19th, 1777, the commander of the Continental Army, George Washington, the future first president of the United States, led his frost-bitten troops into winter quarters at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. Things could hardly have looked bleaker for Washington and the Continental Army as 1777 came to a close. Though he had hoped to provide his weary men with more nutritious food and badly needed winter clothing, Congress had been unable to provide money for fresh supplies. That Christmas Eve, the troops dined on a meal of rice and vinegar, pretty miserable meal to eat, and were forced to bind their bleeding, frost-bitten feet with rags. Washington wrote to Patrick Henry, "We have experienced little less than a famine in the camp. Washington wrote to Patrick Henry the following February. He also wrote, "It is impossible to rightly govern a nation without God and the Bible." And very briefly here, as we come to a close, I would just ask, what would George Washington say if he came inside this room? I believe that if he came here and addressed everybody that's in this room, he would say, what a tragedy that we have taken something that was so valuable to the beginning of this nation, Christmas, and removed it from our school systems. And so I would just plead with you this evening that you would reconsider the decisions that were made a couple of years ago, and that you would reconsider and not prohibit Christ being in Christmas in our school system here in Springfield, Missouri. Thank you so much for your time.
Our next request to address the board at this time is Mr. Bob Monday.
Thank you very much. A few years back, I was at a local public school, and they were having a Christmas time without any songs about the Christ of Christmas. I was told later by the principal that they didn't want to offend the Muslims, so there was no songs about the Christ of Christmas. So I'm bringing you an example of law that has been brought down. Like this is December the 8th, 2015 AD, Anwe Domini. Is that correct? I'm not know if I pronounced that right. And I'm sharing this out of the King James Bible, chapter 2. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria, and all went to be taxed, and every one into his own city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth into Judea, and the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be taxed with Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child. And so it was that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. And there were in the same country shepherds abiding in the field, keeping watch over their flocks by night. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them, and they were sore afraid. And the angel said unto them, Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. And for unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. And this shall be the sign unto you. Ye shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill towards men. Almost 50 years ago in a few days, I will have graduated from Central High School as a Bulldog. You know, this is the greatest school system in America. I have lived the American dream. You know, one of the funnest things I had recently is to sing with some of the Salvation Bell ringers. Yet I've had the opportunity to sing before 55,000 people at Busch Stadium, and with Brooks and Dunn, major places. We need to get back to this precious book so our kids have an opportunity to know what his story is about. Thank you, and may God bless you all, and Merry Christmas to you all.
Thank you. At this time, we'll move on to 12.01, our strategic discussion regarding our board goals.
Yeah, we won't go deep tonight because we have combined meetings, and you had legislative opportunities that started at 4. So I know your time is and your energy is probably wearing out. You're almost 4 hours into your work tonight. But what the board officers and I have been working on is reviewing feedback from retreat. If you remember, we had retreat at Sherwood a few months ago. And one of the things that we talked about last year and this year is going ahead and moving forward with the establishment of board goals. And what we've done is kind of come up with a rough draft and seek your feedback. So we're not going to dig into dialogue tonight, because of the length of the evening, but put it in your hands. Give us give us feedback. Tried to really take the conversation that we had at retreat and capture it, and make sure that it focuses on the real responsibilities of the board and the opportunities. So there are 4 goals and a few strategies, maybe a strategy A, strategy B underneath each one for consideration. Again, this is just a starting place, very much in draft form, but once your feedback, we'll bring it back in January for further discussion, but get you thinking on it. And we've also got some ideas of how we measure that, right? Because part of it is building up a measurement process, and sometimes that's as simple as just a board feedback process, your review, but then there are other ways that can get more complex, and we'll enter into that dialogue. So Tim, Denise, anything to add?
Annie won't let me.
Annie said no. It's in your hands. Please give it a peek and see if it captures what you thought, and give us feedback, and we'll dig into a deeper conversation in January.
I like short and sweet, very easy.
Tried to keep it concrete, so.
I'm sure we will have further discussion about this. There's some really good pieces and parts of this which will allow us on some of our oversight duties on leadership accountability for aligning resources with strategies, identifying the plan, is that now we have a strategic plan. It'll be much easier for the board then to look at. As requests come to us for resources, we can go back and align to that. So there's some things that will give us some guidance as board here. So, okay, so you want us to give you feedback on this? Review?
Provide you feedback, and
very good. Okay, anything else?
that's it on board goals.
Okay, moving on to report from administration, a cabinet report.
Just a brief report as we have a combined meeting again, and we'll just have Ms. Embry, Dr. Dawson, and Mr. McKenna speak from their seat, and I'll have one short thing, but Ms. Embry.
I did share with you about the energy conservation RFP information, so that work continues. I also had shared with you at our last meeting about the change that administration was developing with regard to management of custodial services. And I want to share with you that one of the strategic changes with regard to that effort is we are posting the position as Assistant Director of Building Services. That position will work collaboratively with our Director of Building Services, Dave Bishop, and that will cause instant synergy and collaboration with regard to how to address the needs in our buildings. And we're excited about the change that will come forward with that. The other thing I mentioned, excuse me, previously is the work of the capital planning process, and we are going to be developing that budgeting calendar very soon, and we'll get that information your way. And lastly, the facility master plan process. We did receive 4 responses to the RFP for facility master planning. Those responses were received last Thursday, and we are going through a process now to evaluate those to determine interviews to be scheduled, and we'll be providing you additional information as that is developed. Thank you.
Awesome.
I would just take a moment to, as the first semester comes to a close, I want to take a moment to thank our administrators, teachers, and support staff for providing a quality education to our students. I've had the opportunity to visit many schools and classrooms, and we have amazing, engaging, relevant, and personal opportunities happening every single day. Today I had this amazing opportunity to visit Westport and see middle school archery in action. So what a great opportunity for us.
Behind them?
I was behind them, yes. Good call. I also want to recognize Allison Pilley and her team. They have started to put together our K-5 representatives who are looking our social studies curriculum, looking at aligning resources, starting to write project-based learning units, including technology and literacy inquiry. So we want to thank the work that those teachers are doing. They are basing that work on the proposed standards that are out for review right now from DESE. Last week, we had a great opportunity for our secondary leaders to come around as we kicked off Imagine SPS Secondary. It was 40-plus leaders led by Dr. Hackenworth and his team, where they went through on day one, they went through kind of a design boot camp where they were engaged in this kind of a design thinking process. The next 2 days, they spent, a big part of the design thinking is empathy, really knowing what the customer is feeling and thinking and doing. So for the next 2 days, and you have a book, and I think I left it there for there's a schedule in there. It's Imagine SPS. Yep, there's a schedule in there. But the next 2 days, they immersed themselves in the buildings as students. They were given backpacks. They were given schedules. They were given the same rules to follow and expectations that our students do. It was a great learning experience for our leaders. And if you are in Twitter, I would recommend that you would hashtag or look up Bill Powers. He wrote a blog about his experience, and it was a powerful learning moment about things have changed, but his surprise was how many things haven't changed since he was sitting in the seat as a student. So that was a great opportunity. That team came back and started to talk about ideas, and they started to prototype some ideas, and they also went out and did some feedback groups with we had 150 students giving them feedback on some of their ideas. So it really boiled down to 3 significant areas, which was creating more student choice in our system, looking at the student learning environment. So I think that came from sitting in hard chairs for 2 full days. They would like to do something different with that environment. And then looking really at doing something completely different with the master schedule that would create more flexibility and choice for our students. So the next steps will be to take some of those ideas and now bring in stakeholder groups, university partners, business partners, parents, teachers, and students, and start to continue to blow that ideas out, and hopefully we can come back to you with a more full, robust report in February. So I just want to again thank Dr. Hackenworth and his team for what they're doing. This week we'll be kicking off innovation grants. This is an idea that we've put into the system to create more synergy about engaging relevant and personal experiences. Teachers will have to create a 4-minute video that they will post to Twitter. You can follow all of the applications or submittals on the hashtag #ImagineGrant. Teachers will be awarded $500 to $1,000 to do something different that will help engage and create a relevant and personal learning experience. So we're really excited about this innovation grants being in the system. We think we'll start awarding them. We'll kick off here in December. We'll start awarding in January weekly, so you can see the award winners on Twitter. The nice thing about Twitter is it's going to capture all the applications, all the submittals. So you're going to see lots of ideas about how this might change and infuse this synergy that's happening in the system. I go to buildings, I see this organically growing, right? So in the system, this change that we're promoting, and this is just going to infuse that change to go at a faster rate. So I'm really excited about that. And then lastly, I've also kind of provided you an update on Explore. That's our summer learning opportunity. Just a couple of that plan is going full blast right now with the team. Right now they've designed a program that will double the number of instructional days. So it will include June and July. It's going to be very personal with learning devices for our 3rd through 8th grade students. And they are expanding our online offerings for our secondary students. So you'll start to see the marketing start to kick in here at the end of January for Explore in our summer learning program. So great things happening in your school system.
Mr. McKenna.
And continuing our conversation about the strategic plan and traction in the strategic focus areas with specific focus on focus area 2. Just a little bit of information about the recruitment and selection process that we're working on. Our goal this year is to make that process as efficient as it ever has been, with the goal of getting to the market as quickly as possible to be competitive with the districts that surround Springfield. And so we're doing some really great things with regard to making the process easy, more streamlined. We're going to be taking out several steps for principals, and they'll hear more information about that tomorrow. So you're getting a little bit of a sneak preview. But ultimately, they will have a pool of candidates to select from that were selected by their colleagues, and they'll know that those candidates are the best that the market has to offer here in Springfield, and we had the opportunity to get to them, hopefully before they were snatched up by surrounding school districts, which we know that we compete for talent for. Also, with regard to development and performance planning, that kind of thing, you know that we've redesigned the evaluation process for teachers and for principals. We're continuing that redesign for support staff, and that's rolling throughout the entire system. But with specific focus on teachers, we are designing that process in a way to provide meaningful feedback not only to the teacher but also to other stakeholders. So for example, our colleges of education. We will have the goal of being able to aggregate teacher performance data, specifically of new teachers, and provide feedback back to the colleges of education and the education programs to say, you know, here are the areas that we as your customer are receiving talent from you that are really excellent, that are very proficient, and here are the areas that we think that perhaps they can improve. So that's good feedback, we think, for them, and as we continue to try to strengthen that talent pipeline. And then lastly, we are wrapping up our season of surveys. 'Tis the season, as we say, with surveying, and so we're wrapping that up this week and next week. This is the opportunity that all staff have to provide feedback about their supervisor and to provide feedback about their working and learning environment. So that is rolling out to all schools this week. So principals are the ones that are receiving feedback from their teams this week. And it's a great opportunity for us to grow and to increase the engagement of our staff.
Very good. Last thing for me, I would just tell you, coming your way, you'll see a perpetual calendar, which we've been talking about for a long time, and this really captures when you will see reports, the big work on an annual basis, instead of just saying, oh, what do we have next month? What do we have next month? So it helps you chart out and see the work and how we are getting behind the work as the leadership team, but make sure that you're aware and have this on your radar too. Also, kind of shows you the focus areas and when they will be reported on, both mid-year and end-of-year reports, because we'll have 2 different cycles of reports on our focus areas and our goals. So, this is coming your way soon. That is it in the area of admin reports. Legislative update, I'll just continue down the road. Obviously, you were here today for a good meeting, I think, with our legislative delegation. I've been hosting many of these people in our sites for school visits, for just one-on-one. I've had 5 or 6 in the last 2 weeks, and I've got several in the next 2 weeks, trying to get as many possible between now and our break. So I really appreciate them giving the time, and I thought we had a great conversation today as we head into the session. They know our priorities, and we'll look to engage with them throughout the session to make sure that they're thinking of Springfield Public Schools when they're making their votes and building the legislation. Only other thing legislatively, I would say ESEA reauthorization has been a big point of conversation, and if you think of the updates that you've got from MSBA, you'll know the House passed it last week. We're waiting on the Senate. They actually debated it, closed debate today, earlier this afternoon, and the expectation is that a vote would happen in the morning. So pay attention. We are hoping that passes, obviously. Is it a perfect bill? Obviously not, but it's much improved, and reauthorization is much needed after 7 years of living under an unauthorized bill. It's time to move forward, and I think the biggest thing that we see, and even the Wall Street Journal quoted this last week as they looked at it, is said this is the biggest shift of power back from the federal to the state level in more than 2 decades, I think. So we're excited about that, and we are poised as leaders across the state to take on that challenge and add some of the things that we've said for the last few years that haven't been a part of our accreditation and assessment process that really add value, the things we talk about every month. So that's what's going on in the legislative area.
Excellent. Thank you. Anyone on the board have any comments regarding legislative update? No? Okay, we'll move on to Board of Education discussion. It has been a long evening. I don't know if we have much to say, but if anyone has a comment they would like to share at this time, if you've been in any buildings or had any visits. Anyone? Annie?
Went through the new administrative offices today.
Yeah.
Very nice. I'm just wondering if they had an extra desk I could move into or anything. It's
Not much
very
room for
pleasant. Very. What's that?
Not much room left.
No, I know you filled it up.
Filled it up.
The collaboration space, it's so pleasant and bright, and I was really impressed with that. And then I took a couple of community leaders through a Sherwood tour last week, and they were ready to bring their employees over to be taught by your teachers on how to collaborate. So I think they're ready to schedule that anytime you have time.
Sure.
They were
Working
very,
it.
very impressed with what's going on there. Yeah.
Anyone have anything else?
Only comment I have is we were in Delaware last week,
you ought to go to Delaware sometime if you just want to be uplifted
Yeah.
and feel good when you leave.
You want to leave with tears in your eyes.
With tears in your eyes, but those people at Delaware are doing incredible things for some kids that have difficulties
Awesome.
coping, and it's just amazing. It's heart-tugging for sure to see that, but unbelievable staff over there and the commitment they have those kids. And every time I go over there, I don't want to go over there, but just go. Yeah. It's pretty uplifting. It'll make you feel good.
Sandy and I both got to visit a month ago, and it is amazing, and what the folks there do. You know, it comes from one place, and that's right here. That's why they are doing what they're doing. So I also had a chance to I kind of helped myself over at the Sunshine Building. Walked through, had a great time walking through, and I had heard some great stories. It's an awesome building. I would love to work there. One thing that I was most impressed with, I did talk to one staff member that related a story in which they had a parent stop in a few weeks ago that was extremely upset, and not upset in a way in which they're angry, but they just were at their end of the rope and trying to get services for their child. So the parent stopped in, and this particular staff member was able to bring all the important people into one office and sit down with his parent. So all the services that we now house in that building that were in 3 separate buildings at one time, be able to bring all of those individuals together and sit down with that parent and work through that situation. That parent was able to leave with a solution and ready to move forward. And as the staff member told me, in the past I would have had to send her to a building on Traffic Way, a building downtown, a building on St. Louis. But anyway, that's enough for me, that if that continues and that kind of collaboration goes on, we did the right thing and a good thing, and looking forward to additional opportunities for bringing those similar services in the same building. But anyway, okay. Anyone have anything else?
Yeah, Denise, I went to I went over to the Community Foundation on Thursday and Friday. I just stuck my nose in, kept my fingers out, but stuck my nose in just to see what was happening with Imagine Secondary. And I tell you what was happening was some very exciting thinking. And I am eager to hear the report in the next few months about where this may be going, after seeing the direction we're going on the elementary side, and then hearing the kind of discussions that were going on and the kind of revelations that were taking place last week among the participants of this. I think we're in for some exciting times.
Rich conversations, administrators, teachers, counselors, librarians, all a part of that process, and really some, yes, we have them, yes. And they were rich conversations around the table. It was exciting to see. So February, we hope to have a report for you.
Excellent.
Thank you. Okay, upcoming meetings. We have our study session January 5th. That's our next upcoming meeting. This is our combined meeting, so we won't meet again the rest of this month. However, if you are looking for wonderful things to do, check the district website. There's lots of activities going on in our buildings between now and December 18. Is that the last day before holiday break? We're supposed to know everything. No.
I show up every day.
So, okay. Any other upcoming meetings that I'm missing here? Okay. Moving on to 15.01 plus Delta purpose statement. Last meeting, the last 2 meetings in a row, we've had 4 very nice pluses. And so we want to continue to hear from you if it works, or if it doesn't work, put your post-it on the board. And at this time, we do need to move into executive session. So I need a motion that the board meet in exec session following this meeting to discuss real estate and personnel matters as provided in section 610-021, 2, 3, and 13 RSMO. Do I have a motion? Annie Bush, do I have a second?
Second.
Jerry Lee, and at this time we will vote.